The year is 2015. The month, April. And New Jersey indie band the Wrens have just posted this image on their Facebook page. One simple CD that contains the follow-up to the band's highly praised third album. 16 tracks that a small, devoted fan base had been eagerly but patiently awaiting from these guys, hoping for something that could even just be half as strong as the prior release. It's an album that, within the indie music world, had a near unmatched level of build-up. And it's also an album that we will never hear. 2003 was when the Wrens released The Meadowlands, a cold, foggy record that waffles between sounding half-dead and being fully reinvigorated. The vocals, whether from drummer Jerry McDonald, guitarist Charles Bissell, or the brothers, bassist Kevin Wellen and guitarist Greg Wellen, all sound like they've been muted or pushed down by forces outside of their control. Despite the audible efforts to project their voice when recording, it's almost as if nobody's going to hear what they have to say anyways. And that in itself is what the Meadowlands is. It's about carving your own path with full confidence, and it's still not working out how you thought it would. Time passing by along with opportunities, relationships, regrets, youth. Songs touch on the band's camaraderie, the love they have for their live shows, or their willingness to push back against a record label treating them poorly. Yet the album's final song still ends with the words, "This is not what you had planned." The Meadowlands is much more consumed by these somber failures and regrets from a band of 30-something-year-olds whose rock band, at that point, never quote-unquote made it. They'd been a band since 1989, and the most success their music got was some light indie scene praise for their 1996 album, Secaucus. So later on, they're at a point in between keeping at it and fully settling down where they are, though very obviously closer to the latter. They weren't touring, most of them had office jobs, and one had started a family. But the rest were still living together in this house in a quiet, swampy part of Jersey, and all four of them would still toil away with songs day after day. It's the work of a band that, in a way, barely existed. They were hanging on by a thread. You know, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there to hear it, did it make a sound? That's how these guys were viewing their work. It's years of being exhausted, fully drained, and having little confidence in their music leading to anything. But that's exactly what's harnessed and expressed to create one of the most hard-hitting albums of the 2000s. Those feelings are clearly presented right from the very start. The House That Guilt Built, Jerry McDonald's only song, acts as a table setter, a thesis statement in one of the album's quietest moments, where he's arguably not even singing or speaking. The voice is just barely breathing out these lines.
It's been so long since you've heard from me. Got a wife and kid that I never see, and I'm nowhere near where I dreamed I'd be. I can't believe what life's done to me.
Displaying the toll of being in between these two worlds that you care about and trying to hold on to both, but inevitably needing to let go of one eventually. Even the thin instrumentals of that short track manage to further illustrate the difficulty in that. After his last line, all the music goes quiet. You only hear the crickets and birds from outside. But after a long pause, the guitar starts strumming again, then pauses once more, then keeps strumming as it fades out. It's like the song itself is dying but wants to keep going. Like it's a band still grappling with the idea that their dreams are pretty much dead. They've almost reached full acceptance, but aren't quite there, and the rest of the record is the strongest last gasp they could muster up. Because yeah, most of how I've talked about the record so far describes a slow, depressing, you won't get out of bed for weeks after hearing this type of sound. And some songs very obviously match that, like that opener, the closer, and Greg Wellen's only song, 13 Grand. But really, despite those downer themes, the record overall has strong energy to it. Often it takes time building up to that, as is the case with the second track, Happy, that starts about as quiet as the intro song, but gets more layered as Kevin Wellen details one side of a souring relationship, and the instrumentals just intensify more and more until the song has to completely stop and reset itself with a different wordless jam. possibly the album's single solidly upbeat moment, because other songs that reach its speed and volume exceed it in ferocity or harshness. Like This Boy Is Exhausted, a song tied to a brief point where the band's original record label was bought out by an executive who wanted to expand it to more mainstream popularity. So he told the band to spend their own time and money working on songs, recording and re-recording, and maybe at the end, if they brought some in that had hit potential, he'll sign them. So after a few months, what he got back was indeed one of the band's catchiest tracks, but one that makes clear their own disdain of him, how he wants to change their sound, and the entire record label limbo that they're trapped in. It has fuck you attitude to it, but still more nuances beyond that because the choruses open up and detail why they put up with stuff like this, having no money, no job prospects, etc. They love what they do, and they're going to keep doing it their way, even if it's the hard way. As with the last few lines, they practically break up with that record label themselves. Which after hearing, the executive supposedly said, "Fuck you, I don't like you guys either," and then probably pulled the lever to send the band out a trapdoor or something. And he also, after that, ceased both production and promotion of the band's first two records, I guess just out of spite, so, like, fuck that guy. Another that starts at full speed and barely lets up till the end is Faster Gun. The vocals are more buried in the mix there than in any other song, but even if you could hear them, you'd probably still be more focused on the clear highlight of Kevin Whelan's bass work. The record's sonically harshest moment, though, is easily Everyone Chooses Sides, another that touches on their quarter midlife crisis. It goes through several sections building up, with these scratchy, rigid guitar riffs and machine gun-esque drum rolls, eventually with the song being ripped apart by these absolutely piercing, high-pitched guitar notes that easily cut through any level of fuzz and distortion that the band had put on themselves. And the notes just keep going and going until the song abruptly cuts off, as if somebody listening couldn't take it anymore and just pulled the plug. Which on paper doesn't sound like a compliment to a song, but it's a really compelling moment for the record both sonically and emotionally. And the extra layer that ties all the songs together is Charles Bissell's talents on the production side of the album, which gives off this damp, well-lived-in atmosphere that complements the overlapping licking our wounds and then standing back up nature to especially his and Kevin Whelan's songwriting. And a big part of that is that, yeah, they were legitimately recording in their own house. They practically lived with these songs day in and day out, all the time in the world, just not necessarily all the resources. So the other piece to filling out their sound the right way was often demanding even more creativity and problem solving from what were already quite creative musicians. Like, what makes up the album's atmosphere is at points so much extra that the band would joke that when they perform live, they're practically a cover band. But when the Meadowlands is just this good, I'm not complaining about them being unable to perfectly replicate it. Songs get so well layered by Charles with all these brilliant little touches. Hopeless has a synth line that stands out so clearly at its first appearance, but upon returning, seamlessly melts in with the rest of the instrumentation. An accordion sound that they wanted on She Sends Kisses is Bissell playing a crappy retro guitar synth. And just towards the end of working on this video, when listening to the album for the millionth time, I only then just noticed these horns or low guitar vibrations or something that I never acknowledged before. It's an album rich with details. Whatever puzzle piece was needed to get a song how they wanted it to be in their heads, whether it's a new piece of instrumentation, different vocal harmonies, or adjusting the mix for the 50th time, they were going to scrounge around until they found it. Because even if nobody else ever heard the album, they weren't going to let it be a failure to themselves. And it wasn't at all. When they were all finally happy with the album and released it, what they created was a cohesive, gripping, vulnerable work that presents a mood and place in many people's lives that few albums have captured. I really struggle to think of another band that sounds and feels quite like the Wrens. They just have this subtle uniqueness that resonated so well that even with the very limited reach it had initially, heavy praise came from almost anyone who did manage to hear the Meadowlands. And with reviews and word of mouth spreading, it gradually became an indie essential, arguably to the surprise of the Wrens more than anybody else. So with their album work being highlighted and even some hammering home the strength of their live shows, people were finally hearing about the Wrens, and their reputation was building up more and more. So at that point, the band did the only thing they could do. They went back to their jobs. I mean, they toured a fair bit over the years, seemingly made music videos for 2 songs, though I'm not sure how much they did with those because they'd already be lost to media if not for this guy happening to upload them to YouTube. And the band did try to work with other record labels to get more copies of Meadowlands out there while attention was on them. But those tours consisted of weekends and work holidays. I mean, in a lot of the shows, Charles looks like he just got out of the office an hour ago. And they were already underdogs and not exactly well organized or knowledgeable when it came to the business end of things either. So it's not like after so many years, once they finally got some momentum, they're ready to go all in on being rock stars again. Instead, playing a few shows here and there, but otherwise on with their lives, and eventually back to writing new music just as they were, for a follow-up to the Meadowlands. And with that, well, about time to actually get to the title of the video, I guess. The Wrens' next album was expected to be a smoother, faster process than what they'd been dealing with. That timeline from their second album, Secaucus, to releasing the Meadowlands was 7 years. 7 years, with most of them spent working and reworking, recording and re-recording the same songs in that same house until they were satisfied. Which is a long, strange path to take that more than anything, especially given that they were already on their own without a record label and past the prime age for a rock band to be, just shows the strength of the bonds within the band. On that, Kevin Whalen said, "I will argue that you can't find many bands like us. Our insane life partnership and commitment through this stuff is special and unique and kind of fucked up. There has never been a day that I or the other guys have not been Wrens." And that's nice, but the fact that they were strong enough to survive that once doesn't mean they're eager to go through that same strain all over again. As Charles puts it, their methods of overly meticulous writing and rewriting are an intellectual game of chasing your own ass. A more efficient process wasn't just desired by fans eager for a follow-up, the Wrens wanted to build on that too. So efforts were clearly put in to avoid a repeat. Like in hindsight, they felt one big problem with making the Meadowlands was actually that they rushed into the album-making process too soon. So this time around, they sat with their songs for longer before coming in better prepared to record and fit them together for a record. In addition to that, they were plagued by their lack of confidence, often having a song and feeling like, who the hell would like listening to this? But when the Meadowlands got such strong praise from pretty much everyone who did hear it, that could be another remedy. So this time around, when they were finally ready to get back in the studio and start working on the 4th album, it went, let me check the title of the video again, not well! Those circles they just spent years running around in only got bigger. Even with those factors, even with Kevin and Charles each having their own songwriting philosophies for this record planned out early, with Kevin choosing an experiment to write 100 demos and then pull the best among them to fully refine for the record, while Charles remains laboring over all the pieces to his initial songs until he feels he put them together correctly. Of course, regardless of what band member wrote the song, they would all eventually be funneled to Charles as producer, who would work on mixing and overdubbing and all that. And that there is the crux of this story. Charles was always the most intense perfectionist in the band. The other guys would be particular and work hard on their songs, but the final track on Meadowlands is something Kevin whipped up in one night and did in one take. And it works. But with Charles' songs, he wouldn't be caught dead stopping at the first take. When he has time to sit with a song, he'll inevitably find a problem, tear the song apart, digging down to that problem so he can fix it by adjusting the tempo, changing tunings, even swapping the choruses of songs, whatever. Then put the song back together, only to see what he did either didn't fix the problem at all, or created an entirely new problem that he then has to figure out. Straight back to chasing his own ass. And there's something to be said for the high bar he sets for himself, given the quality of the Meadowlands. But I want to go through the entire timeline I could find of plans, release dates, and cancellations of this album, because as is always the case, there's such a thing as going too far. The earliest notable talk from any member on the album that I could find was from 2006, when they were strangely optimistic. The Wrens were supposedly scheduled to have an album ready by July of that year, and Bissell stated, "But if July comes and goes without a new Wrens album, things could turn really ugly. Yeah. Later, the drummer Jerry McDonald told Stereogum, "Knowing us, I think it's fair to estimate late 2007 or even earlier late 2008, but certainly no later than late 2010. December 2009, Charles says the album might be out in the summer. 2010, the band will start recording in January and plan to finish by that June. Fast forward to 2013, and Stereogum reported that the album would allegedly be released next year. And lo and behold, May 2014, Charles Bissell tweeted, "Just finished my last vocal, so record's done. Just one more week mixing, and then he says it'll be finished." April 2015, on Facebook, the band posts a picture of the finished CD, says it just has to be sent over for mastering, and then it'll be done. Early 2017, Charles says it's being mastered and might be out in the fall of that year. March of the same year, on Facebook, Charles actually invites any fans in the area to come over to his place and listen to the record before it's properly released. November 2017, podcast interview with Charles states the album is due for release next year. Christmas 2018, Charles is again preparing final mixes, and June 2019, he again calls the album finished. December 2019, still done, probably out in fall of 2020. January 2021, still done and hopefully out this year. September 2021, the Wrens broke up. November 2026. Wait, what? This was news that, for us, came out of nowhere, and with it, plenty else from behind the curtain. Numerous issues between the members that had been bubbling in recent years, and the announcement that Kevin Whelan will be releasing the songs he wrote for the Wrens on a new album under the name Aeon Station. As he puts it, he was tired of waiting. His songs had been done for a while, and that instance where the band posted an image of the completed record 6 years earlier saying it was done, that was totally true. A version of the album was properly finished. But even at that point, Charles wanted to work on it more. So right at the finish line, they decided to take it back and spent 3 more years on it. In full disclosure, on some stuff there is he said, she said between these guys, and we won't know the direct truth and can only speculate, but something that was self-admitted is that with a few of the other points where the album was said to be finished or near finished, Charles was kind of saying that to force a deadline on himself and actually get it finished in a reasonable time. And that part's more frustrating, I think. His general perfectionism, while extreme and in this case particularly strange because with the 4th album and with the Meadowlands, which they partially felt being completed would signal the end of the band, they want it to be perfect because it's one of the only albums they feel they'll ever make. But at the same time, it would be one of the only albums they ever make because they want it to be so perfect. It's this weird cycle that feeds into itself. But still, the very core of that is understandable. When you're creating something you care about, you want it to be as good as it can be. But this, saying the album is nearly done when that isn't quite the case, while not malicious at all, gets too close to toying with fans' expectations. Promising something you aren't sure you can deliver, and doing so multiple times, that's frustrating for us. And another part that's frustrating for the band is when he'd be too pessimistic. One post on Facebook had him saying, "My best years in work are clearly behind me," which is sad because I've pretty much burned every available moment of the last 4 years at least doing this. That's another thing where you can relate to the root of that. When you feel like something you made isn't as good as you hoped, you have a tendency to downplay it and shield yourself from criticism in advance. And I'm sure he only meant to downplay his own songwriting or whatever. I mean, he even said soon after that he thought Kevin's songs were coming out much better. But the thing about doing that here is that, for as much work as Charles does, it's not just his album. It's the Wrens' album that has all their voices in it in some way. So saying something like that inevitably reflects on the whole record, and I don't think it's his place to essentially be telling fans, hey, this album isn't that great. Especially since it probably was great. I have to think that with the new circumstances following Meadowlands, Charles just ended up viewing them in all the worst ways, so that his perfectionism and self-consciousness just ended up intensified instead of lessened. He could have made something just as good as the Meadowlands, but then still not been happy with it. Because while the attention it got would boost the confidence of most people, with Charles the only thing it gave him was pressure. Like, now I have to make sure it's even better than that or else it's a disappointment. And before, the band was largely just trying to please themselves as their own harshest critic. Apparently they finally locked down a version of Meadowlands when Charles was listening to it in full and just thought to himself, hey, I enjoyed that. People might actually like this. With them having an actual audience now, that doesn't necessarily make it better. Perhaps the bar is raised to satisfy yourself, but also be thinking other people will definitely 100% like this. And even with the level of freedom they had with time and place for making the album, the band members weren't living in that one house anymore. Greg left and eventually Kevin too. So they were all more separated, and Charles being in his own bubble just makes it even easier to self-criticize. All that could just add to his nature to tinker endlessly with these songs to the point that he unfairly hates them. And it all reaches a kind of sad extent. Obviously it hurt the band, but Charles himself never seemed particularly thrilled with his work methods either when talking about them.
Perfectionism, but also like the talent versus work ratio skews towards work with me. Like,
I disagree.
Well, that's super flattering, but I've thought about this a lot. Kevin's talented. Like, if he picks up a guitar, it sounds like a cool song. If he goes to sing, he sounds great. You know, the first take sounds great. 10th take sounds greater, you know, or whatever. But, and I have my moments, I know what my strengths are, but I'm way more hit or miss. I don't think I have.
And as mentioned earlier, he even tried to push against them with the deadlines, but there's just something in him that wouldn't relent. It's sad even when the work it results in is strong. While that record or a different version of it may never be properly released, there are fans out there who took Charles up on those Facebook offers and heard the album. And the few times I stumbled onto one of those people discussing it online, the responses were all positive. A writer, Stephen Hayden, was allowed to hear several tracks from it, and his thoughts as well were especially glowing, stating that it could actually be worth the wait. For the rest of us, we knew bits Charles had stated about the album, a potential title, how thematically it often is about the passage of time, like how Meadowlands was, and otherwise we were lucky enough to hear one song that was properly released, called 3 Types of Reading Ambiguity. And that song, even just that, inspires so much hope for the album. It is everything you want out of the Wrens. These sad, lingering guitar lines, the breaths of the musicians that just become blended into the music, as do these other strange, half-broken pet sounds. There's a cathartic build-up that starts as soft as possible and ends with these blaring horns that are upfront and energized, but still feel a little wounded. It even displays the marriage of Charles and Kevin shown clear as day as the song is split into 3 sections. A Charles section, then a Kevin piano section, and then back to Charles. It's this brilliant, unorthodox track, and strangely makes me feel like maybe the album would have been perfect. Maybe it would have been better than Meadowlands. Maybe it would have been worth all that time and then some. But, you know, what's better than being perfect is being done. And that's something that plagued the Wrens for far too many years. But there are also more natural aspects to the fractures in the band. In the Meadowlands, one of its major themes tied to the idea of time and failed dreams is not growing up as much as you should have by now on paper, and the reluctance to change that. And that shared experience was a big thing that bonded them all. By 2021 though, they've grown up. That just wasn't as true anymore. None of them were living together in that old house. They advanced in their careers, they all had families, concerts with any of them were less common. In some cases, they even went years without seeing each other. When time passes and you grow up, sometimes you grow apart. Charles himself admits that outside of a time around 2012 to 2014, where he and Kevin would meet up quite often to discuss songs, the album-making process was quite lonely and just not all that fun. So when the record was finally finished, or done, in 2019, and the band had to come back together to set up plans for releasing it, that was happening in a much different way than it was in 2003, in a way that made disagreements both more common and more dangerous. This aspect of the record falling apart is what's even less concretely told. It is agreed that Charles wanted to change some business arrangements in the band to reflect his larger efforts, both working on the album, but also keeping the band's online presence alive for all those years. And Kevin claims that meant he wanted more money. Charles disputes that, though I'm not sure what else that change in arrangement would really mean. Kevin says even while not being against that change initially, the whole process became drawn out and overcomplicated in typical Wrens fashion. But in the last year before the breakup, a lot more disputes came up. Charles claims that both him and Kevin wanted to make last-minute production changes to the album. Kevin claims he gave Charles an ultimatum to have everything sorted out by February 2021. Charles says Kevin was already setting up the Aeon Station release before the band unraveled. Just a whole mess with a lot of missing pieces. And because of that, I wouldn't want to solidly choose a side on the argument. It's very easy to frame Charles as a bad guy, and if I had to guess where the truth lies, I would think it's closer to Kevin's perspective. But at the very least, a lot of his faults, especially on the perfectionist side, are understandable. And regardless of why it occurred, it's all still a tragedy. I mean, just think of any creative project you started and never finished. This Wrens album is like 10 of those in one. So close to the end, but ultimately not properly completed. And in addition to falling apart itself, it destroyed the 30-plus year relationship of a band and a close friendship. All that time building up to possibly the defining work of their musical career, and then it's gone, and we'll never hear it. Like, the Aeon Station album is strong. It's a good indie record, and you can hear some of the magic on songs that were originally slated to be on that fourth record, like Leaves, Fade, Everything at Once. But as a whole, it is missing that Wrens touch. It lacks the dusty, used up and tossed aside, well-lived-in atmosphere that Charles's production always brought. Their songs feel like they were recorded in a studio, but Wren's songs never felt that clean, and they used that dirt to their advantage. And Charles has plans to release his own songs as a solo album, eventually. But while that may have the correct atmosphere, an album with only his songwriting might need Kevin's more open-hearted, catchy style. When talking about the Meadowlands, Charles openly states that two of his favorite songs on the record are Kevin's, and that they're the ones that came together in the room without much overdubs or tinkering. He spoke glowingly of Kevin recently rejoining the album-making process and positively steering the direction of the record. It's all a balance. I mean, the one song from the fourth album that they did release literally had two of their songs stitched together. You legitimately can't separate them undamaged. So even though Charles says he'll release the intended tracklist for the Wrens album after his solo release, and we can then cobble together songs from that and Aeon Station, we'll be an inch closer and still a yard away. Chasing perfection only took us even further away from it. So, again, done is better than perfect. Whatever was on that CD, or whatever other CD they had the 2013 version or the 2019 version on, probably was one of the best lost albums of our time. I know with pretty much all lost or unfinished albums, we tend to think, damn, it would have been so perfect if only they finished and released it. But if I believe that with any record, in addition to Smile, it's what the Wrens had. At the very least, it's almost certainly the greatest record to be that close to release, falling apart right at the finish line, and during that downfall, taking plenty else with it. For an album all about time, and one that required a lot of time, time sure destroyed it.